Okay, I'll call to order the Santa Barbara City Planning Commission meeting of the 20th of March, 2008. Ms. Rodriguez, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Vice Chair Larson? Here. Commissioner Bartlett? Absent. Commissioner Jacobs? Absent. Commissioner Jostes?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Here.
Commissioner White? Absent. Chair Myers?
Here. Ms. Hubble, I'll ask the question. Are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items?
No, Chair Myers, there are not.
Any announcements or appeals?
Yes, I do have an announcement. Debbie Huey, who has been with the city for 12 years, originally as an engineering technician and more recently as a planning technician, is leaving the city to work for Montecito Sanitary District. So just wanted to let you know that. We wish her the very best.
Yes, congratulations and wishing her the best. At this point, I'll open up the public hearing for items that are not on our agenda, any concerns the public may have for anything that is not on our agenda. If anybody has any, please step forward. Seeing none, I'll close that comment period. And our first item, noted as item number 3 on our agenda, is a continued item. It's the application of Jeff Gorell, architect, John Price, 1298 Coast Village Road. We heard public comment last week. I want to again express the Commission's appreciation for all of the input that was given by the public, both in letters and in person, giving up their time to be patient through that process. And I also want to express our appreciation for your patience in continuing our deliberation to this week. In my tenure here, I think it's the first time that we've done that, and I want to tell you it was a luxury to be able to have that time to formulate the best opinion that we possibly could. So I'll ask staff, is there anything that they wish to add to the project before we bring it back to the Commission?
Yeah, Chair Myers, I wanted to at least go over the issues that were raised last week that you had requested some response on, and we'll just do that as a very brief presentation.
Okay.
Chair Myers, what I can do is skip the project description. I have 4 slides that include the project description just to recap if you'd like, or I can just focus on the questions that arose.
I think we're well familiar with the project. If you want to just go to the questions, that'll be fine. Okay,
the response to comments, there was basically 4 comments, and the first one is, did any new development along Coast Village Road require a vote of the people? We reviewed the file in relation to the annexation of Coast Village Road from 1960, and there was nothing in the staff report or the comments from the Planning Commission or City Council that reflected any required vote of the people. So the answer to that is no. Is the project within the floodplain? The westernmost boundary of the Montecito Creek floodplain is across Olive Mill Road. Also, between the 1950s and today, there has been a flood control project in Montecito Creek, which also alleviated any flooding in that area. So the project is not within the floodplain. We also clarified the Architecture Board review comments. What we wanted to make clear was that when the project was submitted to the ABR for review, the original project showed the total development to the back of the sidewalk along Coast Village Road, and there was a bedroom area that was cantilevered towards the setback along Olive Mill. The ABR had stated that that looked too much and to pull it back. Typically, an applicant will wait till they hear from Planning Commission and pull back the development and make more changes in global with both comments from ABR and the Planning Commission. They chose to make the changes at the direction of the ABR now, and present that to you. So those comments reflect a little bit more development than what you've been seeing today. And then we corrected the conditions of approval, and let me run through that very quickly. On page, first page 2 of the conditions of approval, we went ahead and added in, due to the potential parking impacts, uses other than office and commercial uses as described. So we clarified, added in impacts, so it made more sense to that condition. And that is condition B6 on page 2. And on page 4, 2 corrections. One is C5, and if the private covenants require pursuant to section A.7. So we fixed that. And then condition C8 is in reflection to a concern that was raised about handicap accessibility in the right-of-way of Coast Village Road at the center area. So we've addressed that comment also. And basically the applicant will be asked to upgrade that median to comply with ADA requirements. And finally on page 13, a comment was raised about construction parking in the neighborhood around the project site. And that is condition number 7A. What we added in parentheses is that, let me back up on that one. Construction workers are prohibited from parking within the right-of-way, including surrounding residential neighborhoods within the county. So with a permit coordinator on site and with a construction parking plan that has to be approved by Public Works, we're pretty well covered. So if they find that there's anyone parking within the neighborhood, there will be a coordinator contact and we'll have an approved parking plan also. And that concludes our response to comments.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Are there any questions of staff by the Commission? Mr. Justice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff, can you give us a sense of where construction workers would be parking given this this condition, or is that left up to the construction parking management plan?
That is left up to the the traffic control plan, and they have to show where they would be located. For instance, for the Mental Health Association project on Garden Street, the construction workers have a place to park that is about 3 blocks away, and there is a shuttle that goes back and forth between that parking lot and the construction site. And similar kinds of instances when there is not the ability to park on site during certain phases of the project, that's what happens.
I presume that was also the case with the Korea Hotel,
That's correct.
Hotel Andalusia project,
That's
those types of
correct.
things? Okay, thank you.
Sure, Myers. I'm sorry, I missed one condition that was also addressed, and that is on page 5 of 19, and that is number 11, and that's in regard to any encroachment permits. And what we wanted to call out was that, as proposed, there would be a fountain that would be partially in the right-of-way along Coast Village Road. We just wanted to acknowledge that any development of that fountain would require an encroachment permit. So,
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Staff comment on the letter we were given just before from the Montecito Water District. What's the significance of that? And they quoted usage figures for 3 properties on Danielson Road. I mean, what's the usage
Chair,
for this information.
Chair Myers and Commissioner Thompson, this is information that we requested so that we could compare condominium water use within Montecito for other projects that are there against the proposed use. It matches pretty closely. There's some that's lower, but the indication in the letter is that some of that use is for part-time use. So we took the worst case one, which is the center one of the three that are listed, and compared that against our standards, and they're reasonably close. They might actually be slightly higher.
So basically, this was just to compare with the analysis that was done, and it validated the analysis that staff did on water usage?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will, let me reiterate that we had a full applicant presentation on March 13th and a full public hearing on that date as well. So at this point, I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation and comments. Who'd like to lead us off? Ms. Larson.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to know from the applicant if there's been any changes since our last meeting to the project.
Mr. Gurrell.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, there has been no changes.
Thank you.
Ms. Larson, would you like to lead us off?
Not really.
Would anybody like to lead us off? Mr. Joseph has jumped on the mic here. Mr. Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get things started here. This is the third time we have looked at this project or the underlying assumptions that go along with the proposal. We saw the rezoning application first in April of '05, and I believe the Commission was supportive of that rezoning application at that time, and I have seen no reason to change my opinion on that regard. And I will give some details on why I believe the rezoning is appropriate. We also gave thoughtful consideration to the project that came before us on the concept review in February of '06. And from the plans we had before us, I think a good faith effort has been made to respond to each of the Commissioner's concerns. So that brings us to today. We heard a significant amount of public comment on both sides of the issue. And I feel that this is a project which is definitely approvable. Approvable because I think it is given the general plan and the zoning considerations, it is probably one of the smallest, if not the smallest, floor area ratio project for a mixed-use project that we've seen, at least in my 4 years. I think in general the design and the aesthetic issues, this project does not appear to me to be a monstrosity. I think it is well designed. I went through and looked at the urban design guidelines, even though they don't apply to this site. And I tried to find out if there's any real concerns that I had as far as its size, scale, or bulk. And I found that the unit sizes are significantly lower than most, if not all, of the projects that we've seen in recent time in terms of the square footage to the bedroom size calculations that I think all of us had concerns about. And I think in terms of the benefits that it provides, particularly along Coast Village Road and the setbacks and the improvements along that right-of-way, I think that goes a long way towards improving the site and its relationship to Coast Village Road. We heard comments from the South Coast Transportation folks last week that they felt it was good in terms of its pedestrian treatment, and I believe that to be true. Then I went and I looked at the environmental document that we have before us. It's a mitigated negative declaration. And I believe that that is the appropriate document to have before us and to move forward. We heard concerns about traffic, and I want to acknowledge that those concerns, I share some of those concerns. I've voiced concerns over the past number of years about the way the city calculates the baseline. And I think that causes problems for a number of people, but it is the process that we use. And this environmental document, I think, has been prepared utilizing the city's master environmental assessment, the thresholds, the methodologies that the city consistently applies to all projects, and I feel that the ND is the right way to go. On the findings, and I think the findings are the heart of this project. That's where I really start and work backwards from. We heard concerns that the R2 zone should serve as a buffer between the residential uses to the north and the commercial uses at front along Coast Village Road. And to my way of thinking, the general plan is the document and the city policy that zoning needs to be consistent with. It's standard planning, theory and practice that you adopt a general plan and then you make sure that the zoning you have is consistent with that general plan, because that's the implementing document. So I feel comfortable making the findings regarding the rezoning to the C1. And I also looked at the buffer issue and how the general plan treats buffers between residential zones and commercial zones. And in looking at the general plan map, there are a number of areas along the De La Vina corridor, the Milpas corridor, the Outer State Street corridor, in which there is a green squiggly line which is designated as buffer/stream. And I looked at this site and I didn't see that buffer designation on the land use map. So that further gave me confidence that this entire site, was intended to be a commercial C1 use. And the C1 use is I think, a more modest, lower density, lower intensity commercial designation than the C2 uses that we see in the downtown. It's got a maximum height of 45 as opposed to 60. This project comes in at 35 with a tower element that comes up to 40, 40 and a half. So I feel that the project is consistent with that zoning designation, and that we can move forward as far as the zoning piece. Then I went to the modifications, and like a number of the public I heard, there's a question. The key phrase is that the modification is necessary for an appropriate development of the site. And I focused in on those words, necessary and appropriate, and I looked at all four of the modifications. And the open area modification on the second floor, I think, is justifiable because it has been the city's practice to allow for open space in multi-use and mixed-use projects to take place on that second floor, and I see no reason to deviate from that at this point in time. With regard to the front yard setback, I looked at the overall setbacks along Coast Village Road, and I saw an undulation of the building footprint, and felt that that modification is appropriate because it arises from adding a roof on a second-story balcony. If that modification was denied, I don't think that we would have any better of a project. Actually, I think we would lose public space along the Coast Village frontage. So I believe that is a modification that is supportable. On the Olive Mill Road piece, the modification has to do with the emergency stairway. While I'm not excited about that, I apply the same general logic in terms of, would we have a better project if we didn't allow that modification? And we would have, and I would see that this project would have to make other adjustments in terms of loss of interior, public open space, or moving things around as far as the perimeter of the site possibly going up higher. And again, I came to the conclusion that I could make that finding. Lastly, on the northerly setback, the average setback along that northerly property line, I believe, is consistent with the 17.5-foot setback, I believe the number is. And so in this case, this project gives a little bit more undulation to that northerly building face in response to the residential uses to the next door. However, I could make that finding. However, I'm asking my commissioners, my fellow commissioners, to look at this modification particularly closely, because we do have residential uses to the north, because we've heard from the neighbors and the surrounding residential property owners that this is the most sensitive, I think, property elevation in terms of the residential use. So I'll be interested to hear what my fellow commissioners have to say about that. On the other findings, in terms of the CDP, I think the project is consistent with the LCP, and also neighborhood compatibility and the principles of sound community planning. The development plan, likewise, I've looked at those findings very closely. I believe those can be made. And with all those other findings, I think that brings us to the capability of finding that the tentative subdivision map can be approved as well. So with that, I'm in favor of the project and look forward to hearing from my other colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Justice. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the current 60-year-old gas station that exists on the site is certainly not an optimum use for the site. It's past its useful economic life. And as Mr. Joseph mentioned, 2 years ago, the PC agreed with the current proposed project and that it would be a better use on the site. So I have not seen anything in any of the subsequent 2 years and in the testimony in the last week that would change that original position. And certainly upgrading the site should be a positive for the area and for the property values in the area. Now, in that part of town, parking is a real serious problem. Many retail businesses and restaurants in the area have little or no parking. So we asked the developer to try to fully park the site underground. And underground parking, as proposed, is a real benefit to the area on Coast Village Road. The reduction of 3 driveways that fall out of the proposed project will help traffic flow considerably and actually adds to the on-street parking. So if we go with underground parking, it's costly to produce underground parking, and the economics of the building trade just won't support a 1-story building or even a 2-story building if we're going to go underground. So we can help the area parking by underground parking, or we can have a low 1-2-story building, but not both. The other option is a low 3-story building, and I think the architect is to be commended for designing probably the lowest 3-story building that's come along. Building height has become a pretty big issue. 45 feet is allowed by the zone, and as I said, I think Mr. Gorell is to be commended for bringing it in at under 36 feet. Bill Mahan, who's leading the building height initiative in town, actually wrote the book on building height, and the 3 lowest buildings that he uses in here as a good example actually are all taller than the proposed building that we're addressing right now. So terms that were used as monstrous and huge and all that are really inaccurate. So I guess you can say that the project has a lot of good points to it, and it's not without its issues. The underground parking, the more street parking, the building height at 36 feet versus 45 feet, reducing the traffic, a more appealable building than a 60-year-old gas station, I think are all good points. So issues to be addressed. The zoning map amendment, as Mr. Joseph said, those that said that the general plan should be made to conform with the zoning have it backwards. California land use law says we specify land use by the general plan, and then the zoning should have conformed to the general plan. So the C1 zone as proposed also takes into consideration to try to have a good interface with residential property. So there's not really a problem for me on the zoning map amendment as requested to bring it in conformance with the general plan and the local coastal plan. There are several other discretionary approvals requested, including 4 modifications. Now, the mod for the balcony on the Coast Village Road side is certainly approvable. It actually improves the building appearance for the public and has no negative impact to the public. The modification for the open space on the second floor is certainly approvable, and it's been, as Mr. Josta said, our policy on these type of projects to allow that. But I would say that having the large amount of open space in the center of the second and third floor is forcing the building to the outer perimeter, which is causing some of the problems that people feel the building is too massive. It gives the impression of having more bulk than the building actually does because the center is hollow, and what you see from the street appears to be a lot more massive a building. So while the mod that's requested for the interior open space is certainly approvable, I think you might want to reconsider how you deal with that, because I think that drives the other 2 mods that are requested, and therein I have some problems. The mod for the emergency stairway to encroach onto the Olive Mill Road setback, I think there's insufficient justification to say that it is necessary for a appropriate improvement. And in fact, much is made that the eucalyptus tree on Olive Mill Road is going to be preserved, but as we could see when we were on the site visit, the western half of that eucalyptus tree is going to have to be taken off in order to make room for the building. So I think we need to take another look at the Olive Mill side to see if we can't pull it back and keep the emergency stairway within the setback. Certainly at least the bottom few stairs where it turns and faces Olive Mill Road encroaches even further into the setback. On the north side, I think at least the second floor, if not both first and second floor, needs to be considered to be pulled back, and if there's no way to do it, I think we need a little more justification as to why there's no better way to do it to honor the setback to the north. Just because the setback as proposed fits the current building structure on the neighbor to the north doesn't mean that sometime in the future that property is not going to be redeveloped and upgraded, and to try to move away from the busy Olive Mill Road. Anybody that would build a new building there would probably want to pull it towards the back part of the lot, and that's where the minimal setback would occur. So I think we need to take a harder look at that. Maybe take out some of the open space in the center of the building to enable you to pull back from the perimeters on the north and the east side. I understand that the tower element on the Olive Mill side is to break up the facade a little bit. I don't have a big problem with it, other than the fact that I'm not sure that it's really needed if you're able to pull back the upper floors a little bit, break the roof line by another design method. So overall, I'd say the project is well scaled for a human scale. The size is appropriate, but the apparent mass is larger than it really needs to be because it's pushed towards the outer perimeter. As far as the coastal development permit, not a problem in making the findings to approve if we're able to make the findings for the proposed setback modifications on the north and east. And as I said, I think we either need more justification or do away with those mods. The development plan is certainly approvable, and therefore then if we can deal with the mods, tentative subdivision map is approvable. So I guess having said that I have a issue with two of the proposed mods, I would say from my perspective, I see two options. One would be to continue it, to allow the applicant to take a look and either see if there's a way to eliminate the requirement for those mods or provide more justification, or just not approve those two mods and send it to the ABR with the direction to work it out at the ABR and the design level. My preference would be the first one, but I could go with either. But right now, unless I see more justification for the mods, those two mods, I don't find approvable. Otherwise, I want to commend Mr. Gorell for an excellent job of cramming as much parking underground as possible and doing a beautiful design on a really tight, constrained site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certain that everybody can appreciate Mr. Joseph's going first. I sure do. He did a great job. I find this project to be very approvable. I think it's a great project for the site. I think all over town we can wave at our neighbors from our backyards and our windows, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't necessarily feel that the, I'll get there anyway. Don't want to jump my own gun here. I feel the zoning map is fine. I feel that the modifications I do want to address one by one. I don't have a problem with the modification for the open space on the second floor. I think it's fine. I think this building, for its modest size and lovely street presence, is going to be wonderful on Coast Village Road. I think that it's a terrific addition to, at a pedestrian scale, to an area that we haven't approached as pedestrians before, only by vehicle. So I think this is a tremendous advantage. I think it's great. We're also getting accessibility across the median from corner to corner. There's a lot of pluses here. The emergency stairway protruding, I actually don't have a problem with that either. The modification that I want to talk about is the balcony, and that actually is buffered by the garage, which encroaches a foot, and I don't think it's an inappropriate request. As I said, in many neighborhoods, we greet our neighbors over a back fence. I share a rose bush with my neighbor. It doesn't, not seeing your neighbors isn't necessarily a good thing. So I'm in support of it. I'm in support of the development plan, the CDP, and the subdivision map, and I think it's a great project. And I think once it's built, folks are going to love it. I think it's going to be a good thing for Coast Village Road. I think it's going to bring what we need, people on foot. And I think it's gracious, wonderful architecture, and a well thought out plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Well, during my tenure on this commission, a majority of the products that we have seen have been what I would call an upgrade of the city's character. We've seen talented architects take old, dilapidated, or vacant properties, used car lots, surface parking lots, infill and the like, and create beautiful buildings and add nicely to our commercial and much-needed housing stock. And I think this is one of those projects. The applicant is to be commended on a beautiful design that takes into consideration a number of sensitivities. The fact that this is truly one of the most important gateways to the city, as well as to Montecito, and the applicant has heard the suggestion of his advisors and decided to build a mixed-use development rather than replace it with a gas station is commendable. Design features such as pulling the building back from Coast Village Road and creating attractive, usable open space at the corner, underground parking, the attention to modest plate heights, wonderful landscaping, architecture that blends in with the character of Montecito, and the many considerations that have been given to the residents and commercial occupants through well-thought-out design amenities, as well as the other features, are all really commendable. And now when one filters through the public input we received regarding this project and weeds out the more emotional responses from the opponents and the testimonials to the character of the developer by the proponents, one finds compelling arguments regarding planning on both sides, I think. And I'm not going to enumerate all those arguments here, but I would like to strongly point out that they represent what we see with many projects that currently come before us, and those are issues that arise from a changing community sentiment and the somewhat broken rules which we have to base our decisions, as well as planning long-term projects, project by project. There are consequences with having to do that, project by project planning. It illustrates how important it is that we move forward through the general plan update process with vision and the implementation of sound planning principles. Now, Coast Village Road is ripe for a comprehensive plan, and I would encourage the various Montecito activist groups and associations to take an aggressive and proactive role in participating towards that plan. I think a form-based code approach would be ideal for this corridor. If we were to look at this project with that kind of vision, we would have to pay more attention to certain critical design elements. We have had 2 former planning commissions come forward in support of this project. Yet by the very treatise that one of those commissioners provided this commission on view corridors and how buildings and corners should step back from the street on both street fronts, this project would not be acceptable. My assumption is that the support of this project comes from the fact that the applicants successfully achieved their objective in less than 40 feet. In actuality, it illustrates to me exactly what happens when height limits are an issue. The project gets pushed out and into the need of modifications. Now, I can support staff's recommendations allowing a 10-foot interior yard setback on a smaller portion of the northern boundary for a greater setback on the remainder of that portion. I think that makes sense, especially when that encroachment only has an effect on what appears to be an illegal building on the neighboring property. I can also support the modification to allow 10% common open space to be located above the ground floor. This is not uncommon to this type of development and design, and there are so many immediate outdoor resources of which residents can take advantage. And I find that the 2-story balcony modification to be a non-issue. If it didn't have a roof, it wouldn't be a modification, and the roof certainly, as noted here many times, only enhances the design of the building. And where I have a concern, as Mr. Thompson has, with this project relates to the encroachment of the emergency stairway modification. I feel that the eastern elevation is simply too massive for this location. I don't feel it transitions well into the neighborhood. I think the tower element could be moved to the western side, and in favor of reducing this to 2 stories, this side to 2 stories. I, contrary to popular sentiment, would favor the study of a 4-story element, more towards the center of the project. And with these plate heights, I think it could be achieved in or around 45 feet, which I think is reasonable. And as I alluded to in my question last week, I also have concerns about the bus stop and trash pickup on the Olive Mill Road. I realize the frequency of both the bus and the trash trucks are infrequent, and the impact to traffic will probably be minimal. However, this is a unique intersection, and regardless of how the services conducted, these services conduct their business up the street, when they get near this intersection, they have more significant impact. So with 5 or 6 interceding elements to this intersection, and with the possibility of a future roundabout, how these services interact here, to my opinion, needs really a lot more consideration. So I, along with Mr. Thompson, cannot approve the project as it is. I would look to see the adjustments to the project alluded to by Mr. Thompson, and would look forward to further discussion by maybe our other commissioners regarding the modification of the emergency stairway and the massing on the eastern elevation. Thank you. Mr. Justice.
Mr. Chair, I wasn't quite clear about your comments as they relate to the northerly side of the project and the modification requests and your feeling as to whether that's appropriate or not, or what should be done on that corner. So if you could give us more clarification.
Sure. I'm sorry. I, like you, feel that the trade-off of allowing a much larger setback in the majority of that elevation to grant the modification of the 10-foot setback in a smaller portion is justifiable. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to make an agreement with you on one thing. You mentioned the idea of the Coast Village Road plan and that the time is ripe, and you mentioned that this would be an ideal location for form-based coding, and I certainly want to echo that. That has been in my mind for quite a long while.
Thank you. Well, I will look to for a motion in one sense or a suggestion in another. Mr. Thompson?
Should we perhaps have since there are 4 discretionary modifications, should we perhaps have a straw vote on the 4 modifications before we proceed with overall motion on the 9 items?
Okay, I think that we have consensus on 2 of those modifications at least. Mr. Justice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Responding to Mr. Thompson's comments and options as he sees it, I would prefer to make a decision today, even if that decision entails not necessarily making all the modifications. I think that sends a clear message, and I would think that the response will be what it is once we decide how to move forward.
Ms. Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest, as Mr. Justice does, we make a decision today, and then we send it back to the ABR, whose purview it is to determine architecture, and that's my suggestion, is that we could come to a decision today and then send it where it needs to go.
All right. Can someone craft a motion to that extent? Mr. Thompson.
And since we don't have all of us having the same idea about the 4 modifications requested, you don't believe we ought to do a straw vote on each one of those to see if any of those should be denied?
Well, you can craft the motion as you wish and deny those.
Okay. I would move that we take a straw vote to deny the mod or allow the applicant to bring back to the staff more justification on the modification requested on the north side and on the the Olive Mill Road side.
Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. I think that instead of a motion to deny those modifications, I think the Commission is looking for, or I'm sensing that at least 2 members of the Commission are looking for noting disagreement with those modifications and pushing them back to the design boards for review. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I actually don't have a problem with the modifications. So as far as the project sits, I can approve it, and I'm done. I can make a decision today.
Okay, Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I first made my remarks, I was a little bit non-specific on the issue of the northerly property line. And let me give you a little bit more of my thinking on this. We are doing a rezone from the R2 to the C1, and that is a less restrictive zone in terms of heights but the intent of the C1 zone is to provide some buffer between the residential uses on one side and the commercial uses. So I tend to align with Mr. Thompson's feelings that we should push for more setback on that northerly property line. And I'm not sure of whether it's just the second story or both the first and second story, but that's the only major area where I still have some residual concerns.
Okay. Well, I see concerns, I see an approval vote, and I see concerns regarding the two modifications, one being the emergency stairway modification and the northern boundary modification on Mr. Thompson's part, and the northern boundary modification on Mr. Jost's part. So I would look for one of you to make a motion that includes those and sending them back to the design board.
Chair Myers, maybe the best approach is to take those two modifications individually and decide what you want to do with each of those two modifications. I think Mr. Thompson's idea of a straw vote actually makes some sense to you, so that you get a sense of what the overall motion on the project will be. So, but I think in putting them together in the motion, that may have been what got a little sticky for at least a couple of you. So maybe try the two of them individually, the Olive Mill Road modification and the northern boundary modification, and talk through those, and then come back to look at the larger project once you've decided on those two.
All right. So let's take a straw vote on the northern boundary modifications, this 10-foot setback modification and the 17-foot setback zone. All in favor of denying that modification? Say.
Mr. Chair, could you phrase that in the positive so it's not confusing?
All right. Well, how about I leave it up to another member of the commission to actually make the motion?
Could I make a request as to the motion that it separate out?
Hold on one second. If you could identify yourself.
Oh, yes. Douglas Fell, representing the applicant.
Okay.
That in the straw vote that you separate out on the northern property line the second floor and the first floor, so that those are treated separately.
All right. Mr. Justice?
I would ask that the straw vote determine whether the commission can support the modification on the northern property line. With a yes vote meaning yes, you can support the modification, and no vote meaning no, you cannot.
Okay, those with a yes vote?
Yes.
Ms. Larson, those with a no vote?
No.
No.
So I'm sorry, I was yes on that modification as well. So there's 2-2. Okay. Now, would you like to address, Mr. Thompson, would you like to address the modification for the emergency stairway?
Okay, I would move for a straw vote that the modification on Olive Mill Road not be included. A yes vote means that it would be included. A no vote means that it would not be included.
Those for a yes?
Yes. Yes for protruding.
Yes.
That's me.
Those for no? No.
No.
So that's 3-1. Ms. Larson voting yes.
That's right.
Okay, where does that get us?
Okay, I would make a motion to approve the project with the modifications as determined by the two straw votes.
I hear a second?
Second.
Just a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Did I get your favor?
Aye.
I'm still thinking.
Mr.
Sure,
Chair,
I'll go
Mr. Chair,
for it.
I'm
Send it.
confused about the motion. Could you restate what we're voting on?
Move to approve the project with all of the findings and conditions of approval in the staff report, with the modifications listed as number 3 and number 6 per the results of the two straw votes that we held. In other words, modification number 3 would remain in, modification number 6, the Olive Mill Road, would not be included.
Thank you. Second.
Okay, Mr. Joseph, second. All in favor? Again, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Well, I don't feel the need for the modifications to change,
That's approving the
but
project.
I will approve the project. I
Okay.
am happy to approve the project.
Okay, opposed? Aye. Motion carries 3-1. You have a project. It is appealable to City Council within
10 days.
10 days. I'll also want to note that this also includes the conditions of approval.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Thompson noted that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, Mr. Feld, you have a remark?
I just wanted to make clear, because I know you discussed it, but I didn't really hear it in the motion, that the mods were disapproved with instructions to return to AVR to resolve design of the project without those modifications.
Or without the one modification.
There's only the one mod. The other one failed for a tie vote, so it's,
Okay.
the only one that we voted out was the Olive Mill encroachment.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And that we would go back to AVR to deal with that and not come back.
That's
Great.
right.
That's right. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Okay, that brings us to our administrative agenda. I'd like to hear a motion to continue this because of our lack of...
I'll make a motion due to lack of quorum on possibly.
I wouldn't say it's a lack of quorum,
Ms.
it's
Larson made
a
a
lack of
motion.
a complete commission.
Yes, that's fine.
Mr.
Thank you.
Jost is second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. With that, we are adjourned.